So this is called Utah on My Mind. And this first part is just to give everyone some context about what I had written below. About a year ago, I designed an exhibit, Topaz Stories, which was on display at J-Sei for 3 months during the summer of 2019. This exhibit was seen by a resident of Salt Lake City who had some political connections, and he was able to schedule an expanded version of Topaz Stories in the Utah State Capitol building from June 8th through December 22nd, 2020. I was planning to produce all the panels here and then drive the exhibit to Salt Lake City in a rental truck. Currently, the exhibit's on hold and hopefully will be rescheduled. For about a month though, and that was during the month of March, when the Topaz Stories was still slated for an opening in June, and with the ever expanding COVID-19 news, I started having all these random thoughts on how to deal with transporting and installing the exhibit. These stream of consciousness thoughts are not listed chronologically, but I grouped them together in 4 different groups just to make it less confusing. And finally, I emailed them to the Topaz Story Committee when they were polling everyone on their thoughts about postponing the exhibit. So the first category is getting there. 1, gotta get at least a quart of isopropyl alcohol to spray down that truck cab, maybe 2 quarts. The stuff is cheap. 2, I could probably make Salt Lake nonstop with a 6-pack of Red Bull and Coke. Don't want to stay in a hotel. Ew. 3, I could stop in Winnemucca and join the overnight RV crowd in the Walmart parking lot if I'm too tired. I wonder if the Elko Walmart has the same policy. Better get a container to pee in. There, that means Salt Lake. This is going to be bad optics. An old Asian guy unloading a bunch of stuff out of a U-Haul. Hope the rental doesn't have California plates. If that's the case, it's double trouble. 2, do I work inside the Capitol wearing a mask and rubber gloves or without wearing a mask and rubber gloves? Maybe I could ask Brad what looks less toxic. 3, where do I sleep and eat? Airbnb, hotel? Don't want to stay with the C's in Park City. The C's are friends that we know who live in Park City. I feel like a vector to the COVID world. Terrible, terrible if one got sick. Second part, getting back. Southwest might be okay, but if the line goes beyond A15, I'm gonna freak out. Greyhound, no more than 4 or 5 on board might be okay. Hello again, Winnemucca. Hope no one gets on anywhere else. Better check the Greyhound schedule. Ouch, 25 hours from Salt Lake to Oakland via Las Vegas and LA. 8 stops total, forget that. I should rent a car. Maybe I can use the leftover isopropyl alcohol on the rental car. I'll probably have leftover Red Bull and Coke too. Okay, once I'm back, Susan's going to quarantine me for a couple of weeks. I'll probably be camping in the backyard. Got that nice tent, thank goodness. Better still, I could pitch the tent in the garage, buy a porta potty, fill the cooler with ice and the leftover Red Bull and Coke. This can be my man cave. I can call Susan for room service. Just leave the tray on the recycling bin, please. And then I have a disclaimer. Some of this is serious, Some of it is just fun. Some of it's in between, semi-serious, semi-fun. You decide which is which. You make the call. But please don't be a hardhead, not willing to parse it all. And that was written on March 30th.
Thanks, Jonathan. Have you heard anything from the exhibit, folks?
No, no. In fact, about 3 or 4 days after we took that internal poll among the committee, um, and we wanted to postpone the exhibit. We got a call from Utah and said that they had closed the Capitol building until at least May 31st. So that basically pushed everything back, and we don't know how far it's getting pushed back.
So sorry, you guys are not able to see his photo either, but it's called Mr. Mizuna. Too long a day, too much sun. Mr. Mizuna raises the yellow flags, soon to retire.
So the image is of a Mizuna plant that's growing in the backyard, and it's starting to bolt, and it's bolting with 2 yellow flowers. And I just took a photo. I made a reference to a Mizuna plant in the class, and some of the people didn't know what a Mizuna was. So I took a photo and sent it to everyone, and just included that little line, 2 or 3 lines of verse. And the garden has been a real refuge for me. I mean, I'm just working back there, and it's a place of great solace. So, yeah.
Great. So thank you, Jonathan. And so how has writing been for you during this time?
Well, it's been real revealing. You find out a lot about yourself. You discover pieces of your history that sort of been kind of buried for a while. And in a way, it gets a little easier. I mean, it doesn't get easier right away, but after about a year and a half now, it's gotten a little easier. Yeah.
Can I ask you what you buried?
Well, you ask yourself questions about, you pose questions to yourself that you may not normally ask. And maybe you don't find answers right away, but after a while, you get maybe some insights into why maybe they were just forgotten, or maybe they were purposely put there for a reason. I don't know.
Well, thank you for sharing your writing.
Oh, okay. This is called Effects of a Pandemic. I sit here thinking about what I can write concerning the situation we are all in right now, and my mind draws a blank. I don't think I have ever been in a position like this before. My feelings run from being frightened, sad, insecure, anxious, yet hopeful that this will pass and life will return to normal, whatever normal is. I think about my parents, grandparents, uncles, and aunts who are no longer here. And as much as I miss them, I'm grateful that they do not have to experience the fear of catching this horrible virus that has invaded our lives. Then I recall all the tragedies they endured and somehow managed to prevail, bruised but not defeated. And I realize that their hardships far outweigh this one event that I am experiencing now. They faced racism, the Depression, and to top it all, although US citizens having their freedom taken from them. I keep telling myself, I'll be okay. I wonder what they thought to themselves. In the meantime, all of a sudden, I'm thinking of all the things I must get done during this time of uncertainty. There's cleaning to do, paperwork to organize or get rid of, letters to write, and projects to finish. Top priority was to finish projects that I started and never bothered to finish. As I work on these projects, I wonder why they were never completed. Perhaps I subconsciously saved them for a time when I would need them to distract me from some devastation that would occur. Prior to COVID-19, I was taking a bag making class at J-Sei. Bodo bags are made from pieces of scrap fabric that, when patched together, result in an interesting purse. I learned that the Japanese have always been very creative and clever in using every bit of fabric without a waste. The Bodo bag was a result of this Japanese characteristic. We had one more session left when all classes at J-Sei were temporarily discontinued. Although almost everyone else in the class finished their bag, I still needed that last class to finish mine. I was determined to finish that bag, so that became my first completion project. I worked on the bag, enjoying and admiring each piece of fabric and remembering how I acquired them. They brought back fond memories of trips to the flea markets in Japan. I remember falling in love with the hand-woven, hand-dyed kasuri fabrics. Although one could tell that the pieces for sale were once part of someone's well-worn kimono or yukata, they were treasures to me. Rummaging through my closet, I found another half-sewn purse. The fabric for this project was from a yukata belonging to my aunt. Knowing that I would not wear the yukata, I took it apart and kept the fabric for who knows what. For some reason, I cut out pieces from a Japanese purse pattern, and after a little bit of sewing, put it away in the closet. Last week, while cleaning my closet, I found the pieces and began completion of project number 2. As I sewed the purse together, I thought about my aunt and how I missed my visits with her. About 5 or 6 years ago, my daughter Amy presented me with 4 sashiko coaster kits. Although I had never done sashiko before, I found it challenging to learn a new skill. I couldn't understand the directions written in Japanese, so I tried imitating the illustrations. I completed the sashiko part of the coasters, but again, shoved the stitch fabric away in the closet. Now, because of COVID-19, I have 4 new coasters. Each of those projects provided me with welcome diversion from the more depressing by-the-day news on the television. I miss being able to go out with so many restrictions. I miss being able to get together with friends. I'm sad that I won't be able to see my children and grandchildren in April as we had planned. I'm fearful that we are all so vulnerable and that someone I know may come down with this wicked virus. There's a lesson to be learned from this period of time, however. People seem to be kinder and more thoughtful of each other. As a country, we need to return to the days when people and their lives mattered.
Thank you, Joanne. I didn't give you a proper introduction, so let me just read your bio before you do your next piece. So Joanne Wong taught elementary school in Alameda. Then she moved abroad with her husband, Gene, where she taught dependents of military personnel in Germany and Japan. Upon returning to the United States, she became a stay-at-home mom for 20 years. She resumed her teaching career working with blind and low vision students. In retirement, she enjoys traveling and spending time with her 2 grandsons. And I asked Joanne to share another piece because Grace said that there was just another favorite piece that just came up recently.
Oh, Grace gives great writing assignments too. This is called I'm Ready. Starting here, what do I want to remember? I want to remember how I am unable to do things at this time, like visit my family anytime without a second thought, go out for a meal or coffee with a friend, greet those I know with a hug, run down to the grocery store at the last minute for a forgotten item. I want to remember during walks around the neighborhood, having to veer around people we approach so as not to be closer than 6 feet, greeting them with a wave of our hand. I want to remember being anxious for fear of contracting this terrible disease we have no control over, feeling a sense of vulnerability and a loss of freedom. I want to remember these things because they remind me not to take my daily life for granted. I want to remember so that I have a sense of appreciation for how my parents felt when they were sent to Arkansas, having no control over their lives. I want to remember that although this is a bump in the road, I have so much to be thankful for. I have a wonderful family and caring and thoughtful friends. I have a roof over my head and food to eat. I'll get through this. I am ready.
Thank you, Joanne.
Thank you.
So how has writing been for you during this time?
You know, I think it's been really good because I don't tend to express my feelings a lot, but I think it's allowed me to do that, and it's getting easier now too. So it's been very cathartic, I think.
Good, good. If you could ask one of your parents a question right now, kind of given this time, what would you ask them?
You know, I think I would ask them what feelings they had when they had to go to camp. You know, whether they were frightened or felt helpless or just they talked a lot about camp, and they didn't try to hide anything, but they never really expressed their feelings. So I think that's what I would like to know. That, and the other thing would be, did they ever have any good memories of camp? I know most of it was bad, but there must have been some good times. And if there were, what were they? I don't know.
What is the silver lining?
Yeah.
Like your first piece that you wrote about. No, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah, I was asked by Jill to share some of my thoughts going through the confinement and comparing it with how I felt and what was going on when I was a child in Heart Mountain, Wyoming. So here are some of my thoughts. Back then, I was confined at Heart Mountain during World War II when I was 7 to 10 years old. And now I'm sheltered in place at Belmont Village, which is a senior residence in Albany, California. In terms of what's different about the two confinements, back then I was confined because of my race, because of being Japanese American. I needed to be imprisoned because the government saw me as the enemy, a potential spy, a threat and danger to the America. I personally experienced feelings of shame and humility and rejection. I felt these things as a helpless child, and I really felt that it was a scary experience because although for many years I said, well, as a kid, I just had a good time, when I really got in touch with my feelings, I remembered the barbed wire fences. I remembered not knowing how long we were going to be there. I remembered our parents not knowing either what was going to happen to us. So there was a lot of fear, and I think compared to now, my being confined is not a personal matter. It's not something that puts me down. The pandemic is a worldwide medical phenomenon. I feel no personal connection or responsibility for having to be confined because it has raised racist attitudes, as I think crises often do, that those of us who are Asian are more prone to have people attack us or put us down, but that's nothing compared to spending years in a concentration camp with barbed wire and soldiers in their lookouts and not being able to walk out even though we were US citizens. In terms of what's common or familiar about the two confinements, one one of the things that's very common, of course, is the lack of freedom. Now I'm not free to meet friends and family outside of the residence where I live, and they're not allowed to come in and visit me. I can't get my hair cut, and I can't get my manicure pedicure, so I don't look as well as I wish I could. But you know, this is nothing compared to what I've been through. I'm used to deprivations and lack of freedom. I can live with it. I learned gamang, which most of us did, and learning to persevere through hardship, to be strong in the face of adversity. That's certainly something that I learned in camp. I was sharing with my grandchildren eh, how one learns to be gamang in camp. And I was telling them that we lived in barracks, and in our rooms, the walls were very thin. There was no insulation. And so that anything that we said or what was going on inside of our room, our next door neighbors were hearing too. And so anything like having a tantrum or having fights or bad behavior was something that everybody would know in the neighborhood, because one of the favorite social activities in camp was gossip. So of course everybody's going to hear about us. And you know how important it is to not lose face in the Japanese community. We all have to be looked up to. We don't want to be put down. We don't want people to know us. So that helped us practice gaman, even within our own little room that we lived in. So then, next thing I wanted to talk about was both then and now, the confinement experience requires activities and things to fill our time. Both at camp and at Belmont, the program managers organized replacement activities during our confinement. Belmont Village has done a good job of carefully enforcing health and safety procedures. The management has worked hard to provide activities and programs to counter boredom and loneliness, being very careful that we observe social distance rules. In a facility where I've been able to meet a lot of people, a lot of really very interesting people, I don't feel as isolated. For example, two of my friends here thought that it was a good time while we have to be in a shelter and stay. It's a good time to write stories and poetry. I'm working, so now I'm working on a story titled My Father's Best Friend. Writing is something that I've not really enjoyed. I've had to do it because of my work and my responsibilities. But writing with these friends has been fun because they ask questions and they suggest things. So writing with a group is much more fun, as probably John knows and Jonathan does too. Also, Belmont has a good library, and the program director is responsive to ordering reading materials that we ask for. I've read 4 good books in the past few weeks, which is more than I've read in the past 3 years. Somehow there were a lot more things to do when I was not in shelters. The book that I'm reading now is Madeline Albright's 2018 publication. It's called Fascism, A Warning. And it's really been a fascinating thing. She talks about a period that I lived through, but I didn't really study it. I didn't know all the details in it. I didn't follow all the politics. And when I read the chapter on Mussolini, it sent chills through me because he and Trump are so much alike. And Albright gives a number of examples where fascist leaders are allowed to reign because there's no opposition that's strong enough or focused enough or wise enough to interfere with the personal ambitions of the fascist leader. So I think throughout this current confinement, I've become acutely aware of how important leadership and citizen participation is in terms of how we're going to survive the national crisis. As Japanese Americans, we've experienced the consequences of poor policy decisions by FDR and Trump on our lives. Especially today, I feel it's important that we need to actively work together for leadership that will support the lives and rights of Americans. So that's one of the things that I've gotten from this confinement, a real sense of urgency that we stay involved, that we keep working for what's right for this country. So thank you for letting me share my thoughts with you. And since I'm living in a social residence, senior residence, my experience of living through the confinement is very different from many of the rest of you. So I hope you'll share some of what you're going through now. I really enjoyed what Joanne shared with us. And I know some of you are home with partners who are ill. You're having to take care of them as well yourself. So we have different kinds of experiences, and I look forward to today as a chance to hear about all of you.
Thank you so much, Amy. And thank you always for your wisdom and your words and your courage in sharing them. One of our participants today is someone you know from a while back, is Ron Wakabayashi, who was a JCL director during the Regis campaign, and he really wanted to make sure that I acknowledged your work then and your courage in your testimony for the commission, and how that really helped to speak truth and to talk about things that were important to the Nisei and Sansei. So thank you so much for always speaking from the heart. Yeah. I'm wondering if anybody has any questions for Amy, and you can either put it in the chat or I will look. You can raise your hand. I'm gonna look around. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions, but Amy did pose a question to you. So I'm wondering if any of you might want to respond. She's really wanting to hear what this time has been like for you, for those of you living alone or living and caring for others in your home. Can anyone share what's been going on? Let's see. And if you want to just unmute yourself, that would be great. Anyone want to share?
Jill?
Yeah.
Hi, Amy. So it's funny that my daughter is home being, for the school. Her name is Sasaki, and she had to write a paper on a significant historical event, and she decided to write about the internment.
Go anything.
So she wanted to just say how it is for her, listening to these stories,
Okay.
how it is for her to stay at home.
Well, for me, I'm spending half of my time on my computer.
Your daughter speaking.
There's kind of like a screen and well, I guess it's different from my usual life because I normally am always at school. I spend a lot of time with my friends and it's been really hard for me not to see them.
Turn all caps off. It's driving me crazy. Yes, thank you. It's still on.
Oh, so you're missing your friends?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, and so what do you do to keep yourself busy?
Maybe not try to get a verse.
I've been reading a lot of books and I've been I like to write a lot. So I've been doing that on my own free time.
Uh-huh.
And been I think I've been spending a lot more time with my family, but it's also been way more annoying.
Who else is in your family?
My mom, my dad, and my 2 dogs.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you have the dogs keep you busy too. Yeah, I have the captions on now, so I can read what you're saying. But how did you start off? Did you have a question, or you just wanted to tell me about what was happening?
Amy, she was remarking that you were 7 when you went into the camps.
Yeah, I went to camp when I was 7, and it was in Wyoming, and it was called Heart Mountain because there was a big mountain that all of us could see from the camp. And the story is that it was a mountain that was kind of claimed in by the Indians, by Native Indians, because it gave them strength. And so in terms of my memories of Heart Mountain, the mountain to me is a source of strength too. When my kids were maybe about your age, we took a trip there, and by then all the barracks were gone and they didn't have anything there, but the mountain was there. And for me, that was Heart Mountain. That gave me a real sense of strength, like something I could count on. So that was good. And then the other, I guess, interesting thing about Heart Mountain, because it was during the war and there was a lot of anti-Japanese feeling. Both of my brothers were in the service, and when one of them was home on a furlough, he got a pass for my mother and me to go with him to one of the towns there. Heart Mountain was between the town of Cody and Wyoming, and we went to Powell, Cody and Powell, Wyoming, and we went to we went to Powell, and there were signs that said no Japs allowed at the restaurants and at the stores. And we did get to go to a movie, but it was very clear to me that we were not wanted. We were not liked. And so the other good story about why, and maybe it'll help you understand about why people want to go back to camp. Since in the last 20 years or 15, 20 years or so, there have been pilgrimages going back to the camps. And now we are valued and we are recognized for the hardships we went through. And so when Heart Mountain had its opening for a museum that they built, and I was a little nervous about going back because we're going to stay in Cody, and there were big signs that said, "Welcome home, Japanese Americans, congratulations." And I thought, wow, this is really a good experience. Anyway, that's what happened to me when I was 7. And then again, here I am in my 80s, still thinking about it.
Hello, thank you. Let me see if I can get my video here. Good. So this is, I'm local. I'm across the South Bay and at home, like a lot of people. And when I thought about what I'd like to say today, I thought back to my youth, and I wanted to.
Oh,
Rosa.
I don't know what happened. It looked like Stephen's connection went out. Stephen, are you there? Hmm. Oh, there he is. So we lost connection for a minute, Stephen. I think your mute is on.
Oh, I'm muted.
Okay, there you go.
So I'm talking and nobody can hear me. Yes,
Yeah.
not very good for a teacher.
Now we can hear you.
So I want to share my screen. Oh, that's not the right screen. Okay, let me start all over again here. Okay. I lost what I wanted to share. Let me go back here.
Yeah, that happens to me too, or that happened to me too.
How's this? Can you see anything now?
Not yet. Let's see.
Okay, let me try again. Go back to okay. You have to press share screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
You have to select the application, maybe. Is it giving you some choices?
It is, no, so that's the problem. It didn't give me a choice. Oh, there it is. Okay. Now it's giving me a choice.
Okay, there we go.
And I think that's, does that work?
Yep.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So when I thought about what I would like to say, I wanted to talk about somebody who had a great influence in my life. And Jill mentioned about Harvard. I just happened to be living near Harvard down the street, and it was like my community college. I felt I kind of literally wandered in the admissions office one day, and they said, we have just the right program for you, and we know just the right person. And that turned out to be Kyo Morimoto, who is in the middle of the photo. And so that started, I ended up going there as a student, becoming his student, and spending, well, we were together really about 20 years. And it really reminds me of as I, and now an elder, the importance of mentors in our lives. And that's something that I think the present generation is so missing, and you see a little bit more in Japan, but it's still the sense of emphasizing the value of youth, and has really, I think, taken away a resource for a lot of young people. And and that's somewhat of a role that I work to fill at, for college students and high school students, because I recognize, how much different people that I was able to meet at points in my life, how they have helped me. And I was really influenced as a student also by Amy's work as a scholar, and that was something that inspired me. And when I came to San Francisco in 1984 for the first time, I was welcomed by somebody who's right on the screen too, Reiko Homatru, who offered herself as a mentor to me at that time. And I was about to enter the clinical program at the National Asian American Psychology Training Center. And she has also been a mentor for me since that time. And it's, I think it's certainly, there's the expression, youth is wasted on the young. As you get older, you realize how callous you were as a youth, and how unappreciative, and how much you took things for granted. And especially me as the youngest of 3 children, and just doted on by all these older women and the Japanese side of my family and the Irish side of my family. And learning to, just take things for granted to the degree that you really lose a sense of gratitude that is so important, I think, to really appreciate living, and because otherwise you're just assuming things are bad because they just don't, somehow you lack the appreciation of them, of all the little things that you have in life. And so I wanted to go back to this point. This is back in the, I think, 1986. I was still a student. And Kyo was somebody who was, he was like a doctor of mindfulness before they talked about mindfulness. Mindfulness was not really a word. And even at Harvard, there was somebody who was using the word mindfulness, but acknowledged that the reason was because they were actually mindless. And they noticed how mindless they were. But they couldn't sell a book by mindlessness, so they retitled it Mindfulness. But Kyo was the real thing. Kyo was talking about how simply our presence can be what is really we offer, the most we can offer somebody else. And that he was talking about vulnerability and helplessness and the kinds of human struggles that came out of that context. And his background, he was born in 1918. His parents had emigrated from Wakayama. And he was in Pocatello, Idaho. So it was not a place where they incarcerated people. He had to leave school at 15 because they had a potato farm. He had to help work the farm. He was very small, but he was as strong. He had to lift 50-pound bags of potatoes all the time, and so he was really strong. But he took me in, and he took me like even fishing for unagi and eel, and we did all kinds of things together. And but his background was he had enlisted in the Army in 1942. Very soon after Pearl Harbor, he served in the 442nd. He was very scarred by the war. Sometimes he would tell me little pieces, but he didn't talk much about it. But he was clearly harmed psychologically by the traumas that he had lived through. And clearly it was something that affected him, but also I think he also had a great sensitivity about human suffering that helped him to want to go into the field of counseling. He went to Boston University. He was working at Harvard in a study about psychological states related to LSD. And then he became the director of what is called at Harvard the Bureau of Study Council. And so that's where I did my training as well. But he was at Harvard for about 36 years. He fathered 3 children, and one of them was on our call a little bit earlier, his daughter Monique, but she had to leave. But he was a family man. And he was one of the young Nisei who chose that the way that they would deal with the crisis was through their actions, and that they felt strongly that the best way that they could help the whole community was to join the army and join the military and to serve in that way, and knowing that there would be the possibility of tremendous suffering and sacrifice in that. But that's what Kyo chose. That's what many young men chose. And when I spoke to him, he said at the time he had a great resentment of those young men who made a different choice. Those who said, we cannot go along with this, we must protest, we must fight it. And he said at that time that it was of great difficulty for him to empathize with those men. But he gradually came to feel that everybody was making the best choice that they could. And that was, difficult for him as a young man to see that when he was clearly making a choice in which many of his fellow people who served with him were wounded, maimed, or died or killed. And so he said it created a great deal of animosity, intolerance in him for the choices that other men made. And it wasn't really till later that he was able to see that the courage that they had as well and the choices that they made. And he also said that, some of them chose to go to Japan after the war, a country they had never even been to. And he also said that when he was young, he had a great deal of difficulty to understand what he saw as an Issei consciousness. And that was represented by the expression shikata ga nai. And he had felt it as a real sign of passive resignation. And that he felt like, why are these, old people just giving up? Don't they, why don't they have more of a fighting spirit? Why don't they protest this and say, we're not going to submit, we're going to, and he said he felt very critical, like that's what old people do, but we young people are not like that. We're stronger. And it took a long time for him, he said, to really understand that there were many different ways of looking at what is shikata ga nai. And there is, for some people, the sense of giving up. And he said that can be a deadly thing to do. But it also can be a deadly thing to your human spirit if you simply cannot accept in the vulnerability and the helplessness in any way and continue to fight against it and to have this bitterness in your heart. And he started to think more about what does this really mean, shikata ga nai? And there is a whole sense of acceptance in that, right? There's a sense that we cannot change certain things, and those things we have to accept. And he said from that acceptance of one's vulnerability and helplessness, imperfections, comes the courage to claim agency. So it's that paradox that is, I think, very much a part of Japanese culture in many ways. The paradox that if you can accept the vulnerability and helplessness, that brings a new courage to actually claim the agency of what you can do. And so there's this, it's also deeply rooted in a Japanese therapy that developed from the time of Freud by a psychiatrist named Morita. And it has that same sense of, instead of asking people to change, he says, just accept yourself as you are. And he believed, because he saw over and over again this paradox that if a person could actually begin to accept themselves as they are, the expression arugamama, that you can accept yourself as you are, then naturally this desire to change comes up. And this is not only Buddhist, it's not only Japanese, but people who are also, Christianity, there's also the expression of the serenity prayer, which has somewhat of a similar message, I believe. The serenity to accept the things that you cannot change, the courage to change the things that you can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So Kyo wrote about this. He gave a talk at the Harvard Memorial Chapel and about how this, if you can accept things, it actually brings up these new hopes and new meanings. And you're able to maintain your dignity. And within the confines of what was the limits of the concentration camps, he saw, he didn't see personally, but he heard from people about how they were able to rise to the above those circumstances and not to be completely paralyzed by the feelings of helplessness that they had. And this is something that you can observe through things like the natural creation of, or the creations of natural beauty, natural wonder in the gardens, both the flowers, vegetable gardens, different kinds of artwork that was done, and certainly the poetry and the writing that came out of the camps. And this was all, he felt, attributed to their ability to see that despite the limitations of what they were, the confinement that they had, that they still were able to appreciate that they were alive and that they had the gift of being alive, the gift of life, and that was enough. That was enough to sustain them. That was enough to help them to go beyond the helplessness and the despair, and to actually be creative, and to feel that there was some value in the kinds of things that they could create, both in nature but also in art. And I think if you can see this in other parts of in Japan and Japanese culture, when you saw what happened in Tohoku after the tsunami. This is Mr. Iwasaki, who I met and who was known in his whole, what do they call those places? The temporary housing village in which he lived, as the messenger of goodwill. He walked around the neighborhood every morning and he asked people, how are you? And he gave them a smile. And I asked him, how do you do that? Because so many people are, depressed. So many people are drinking too much alcohol. And how do you do that? And he says, I never forget. I never forget. I always remember, but I remember in a way that enables me to move, to not just sit and say, I can't do anything. And I even feel like I need to do things for those who have passed on. So in particular, he said his son loved that community and wanted to help that community. And he feels that he can do that now. His son can no longer do it, but he can do it. And it gives him some meaning every day to do what he can do. And he told me about that there were many people, young people, that came to that Tohoku area with this kind of gambare message, and it was, he said it was very charming in a way, very cute, but also could be very tiring, because he said there's a time in which we need that message. There's a time in which that message is helpful, but it isn't immediate. We can't immediately feel it, and it isn't something that you just don't get over and try your best. And and there's other Japanese sayings like nanakorobi yaoki, and the sense that you can keep getting knocked down by life, but you got to keep getting back up. And these are beautiful expressions, but they're expressions that have meaning only if you're at the right place in terms of your grief and how you're recovering from a loss. And so he said that these were messages that at the right time have meaning, but there's also great meaning in shikata ga nai, for those who are suffering, and that it's really a time that there is a time in which you need to simply accept what you cannot change. You can't simply start all over again. And one of the ways that many people in Tohoku were coping was with writing. And we've had several good examples today with Jonathan and Grace, was it? And of talking about the writing. And many of them were written in haiku, which I think many, even I teach this with my American students, and they love it because it's so sharp, so concise, and you don't have to be verbose. And you can just write a few words, and it really just contains so much meaning in the very few words. And this was one of the haiku that came out of Tohoku. And it's a translation, of course, into English, so it doesn't exactly match the 575, but it's close. It's bereft of belongings, yet blessed by the touch of the early summer breeze. And the writer said that he was feeling one day like every day was the same, but suddenly one day he felt this breeze on him and he felt like he had forgotten for a moment where he was. And suddenly he realized he felt good. He felt happy. He didn't feel the loss and the despair and the loneliness. Suddenly he felt just naturally good to feel this breeze. And he said he realized that he was alive and that I still am alive and I can still feel this beauty of the breeze. And despite everything else that I've lost, I'm still here and I can still appreciate being here. And this is something that many of you may know it, the expression ichigo ichie, the sense that one moment, one meeting, that any moment in life, it comes, from the tradition of the tea ceremony, but that just being any moment in life is once in a lifetime opportunity. And that as mundane as certainly the days are appearing now, and monotonous or endlessly the same, if you can have that kind of expression, this kind of consciousness, then you have the ability to make every moment in life full of opportunity to be something special. If you can feel that sense of treasuring that moment. And some of you might know this also in the sense of kintsugi, which is the Japanese story about the potter who had a very beautiful bowl made and the pot was dropped. And so the owner returned it to the maker and said, "Fix my pot." And when he got it back, he was very surprised to see it because he had expected that the potter would make it as good as new. In other words, he wouldn't be able to see the cracks. It would be as if it had never been broken. But instead, the potter had highlighted the cracks with gold lacquer. And on the right, you see an artist who had read about this and said, this is a beautiful metaphor for the human spirit, and asked people to come with scars and birthmarks and said she would decorate those with gold lacquer. And so this was a human exhibit, which to me showed the side of the human beings, ourselves as human beings, which if we can embrace all those parts of us that have been our hardships, our wounds, our traumas, our difficulties, that they are what also makes us who we are. Those are the things that make us enrich our lives, enrich our spirit. And certainly that's one of the things that I learned from Kyo about his hardships in the military, his hardships growing up, having to leave school. And then what I have been able to learn about the Issei and the Nisei who were in the camps. And I believe that as our writers have been doing, if at this moment you can go remember, then that can be a great resource for you in terms of how you get through this time. If you can remember enough to know that you got through this, and therefore this is part of who you are. You have this strength. This is who you are. And this is something that if you can get back in touch with that, then it will help you to get through, I think, what we are going through right now at this present time. And so the last thing is just a reminder about, from what we can see from this, the kanji from which show the self as something. The left side is really the individual, but the right side shows that you're part of something. So it's like 1 minute would be ippun, and so it's a part, the individual is always part of something. And to me, that's why this coming together today is so important. It's all about, we can get through this with community. We can get through this with each other. And that's what the self is. The self is always part of something greater than us. And if we can remember that, then that is also what will help us get through the hard times. So thank you very much. I'm going to stop here.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Anyone have any comments, questions?
I do. Great.
Okay. Great.
Well, I really like the flow of this, moving from the personal, the very personal that I think only writing gets to you, you know, for us,
Mhm.
you know, or maybe conversation too, but, you know, this is from reflection. And then Amy's story, her testimony and comparison. And then from Stephen, really looking at our kind of innate values or what we have learned or think we have learned from our ancestors.
Mhm.
I found it very moving, the whole flow that way. Yeah. I don't have a question right now. I think I'm too zoomed out. It was great.
Oh, thank you, Grace. So I did ask Grace. Grace teaches our writing class. And I did ask Grace if she would share a writing prompt. And although I was having problems with my screen, I won't try and belabor that anymore. But I will send to all of you a writing prompt and invite you to, you know, write a reflection for yourself. And if you feel so willing, please share with us. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So any other comments, questions?
A big thank you to everybody.
Okay, that was Emiko.
I want to thank Stephen for teaching us about, I guess, reminding us about his teacher, Kyo, and how he really came to realize about the courage of not only the ones who, yes, and who went to really show their, I guess, loyalty, but the courage of the no-nos, and it's, I think it's not often that we hear about the acceptance of the no-nos, and I'm just really moved that Kyo, who went and really risked all that danger on his life and came back with trauma, and yet really developed that understanding about the struggles of no-no to go through, and to look at the positives out of the really difficulties, and that was very, very moving. I appreciated it.
There's a comment. Sorry, I have to open it up. Anyone else have a comment? I see one on the chat. It says, Kimiko Rodriguez, this is the first time I heard about this Zoom type of online experience. So she said that she really enjoyed it. Thank you, Kimiko. For Anything else to share? Shall I just call on you? They're like, no. Joanne, do you have any comments? No. We can hear Sango. Okay.
This is Eric. I really appreciated everybody that participated and helped put on this. And I got a lot out of it, including I think if I had an opportunity to answer the poll, I probably would have been at the more extreme end of, I find this pretty depressing and upsetting. Every day in the news, you hear of all these people that are suffering and dying and having financial loss and not knowing, how it's going to be for them in the future. And then I see the political and leaders and some of the medical leaders, and I kind of wonder their decisions they have to make are very difficult decisions. And I think about the Serenity Prayer. I'm not particularly religious. I didn't even know it was a Christian prayer, but I've been saying it a lot during the crisis. And well, I say it a lot anyway, but even more now, because it helps me to remember, what things I just really have absolutely no power over and have to accept. And I find with this particular pandemic, it is that way. But I think in the past, we used to hear more that our leaders were being guided by people who had spiritual experience and spiritual leaders. And I really haven't seen that very much. And I'm thinking that type of spirituality, would that help with some of the difficult decisions that you're trying to make about sort of weighing, opening the economy versus creating more disease and more death, and how, they and us, and how we're all dealing with it. And I wondered, if other people had comments or thought about that.
Stephen, do you want to respond to that kind of question? You're on mute.
Oh, I was going to ask if somebody else wanted to.
Okay. Someone else want to respond to that? Me. Well, that's actually a good observation. I do feel at times like this where things feel beyond our control, out of control, that kind of a spiritual grounding is very helpful for me. And I seek that a lot in community, in the readings that I do. Other comments?
So, I really enjoyed Stephen's talk. Learning about his mentor and what his mentor went through was really interesting. And then how he kind of moved into how our philosophy of facing what we're going through now. I mean, it gave it a name, where, I've been, we've been trying to do the best we can. And so when he's describing all these Japanese just mantras, philosophies, that's exactly, I think, how we're approaching the things that are happening. And on our, when we had our Monday afternoon talk with Alan, I mean, I think that's kind of what we were saying, but not using those words.
Right. So all these things that we've learned from our ancestors and in our upbringing, kind of the cultural values and teachings, still stay with us and guide us. It is powerful. Other comments or thoughts? Okay.
Well, I have a question.
Okay, Grace.
Amy, living in, what is the place called?
Belmont?
Belmont. Do non-Japanese people come up to you and ask you about about the incarceration and how it relates to today? You might have said that, but I might have been out of the room a while.
I don't know if she's there.
She's there. Amy's still on. I'm not sure that she heard, or were you able to type that? Sorry, Grace, we want to make sure Amy heard the question. So can you repeat your question, Grace?
Yeah. This kind of comes from some of the people in my class, but I was wondering if, I mean, because they share their experiences in living in the community, and I was wondering if people who are non-Japanese are coming to you and asking you how this compares to the incarceration, or wanting, you know, to hear more about your incarceration story.
I think, Amy, you're muted.
Well, very interesting. We've had times where people have tried to raise the issue about the incarceration during World War II, and we've had some videos played, like of Roar in Arkansas. And, when we tried to encourage discussion about this, most of the people who are actually in the camp don't want to talk about it. It's like, I don't think there's a lot of interest. I mean, there's some interest, but there's not a big push on it. And I think that maybe we have about 6 or 7 people who are actually in the camps, and they don't really want to talk about it. They don't show up for the movies.
Mm-hmm.
They don't show up for the dinners where they could talk about it. There are a number of other people who've been here and who are quite sophisticated and understand history, and you know, they're willing to talk to us about it. But it's I'm struck by how the people who actually went through, it's not something they enjoy talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since,
Yeah, I just wondered if, since everyone is confined, that there would be a different kind of response, a different kind of sharing, but it doesn't sound like it. But thanks, yeah.
Excuse me, could you, Eric, could you get that for me, that question? I didn't get it on the screen.
Oh, it was just a reply. I just said, I wondered, since everybody was confined, if there would be a different kind of response from Japanese Americans who were previously reluctant to talk about it. Because, well, I see another question up here, because some of us think that that ancestral history, for me, has given us a certain amount of strength and resilience right now. So I was just wondering if people were more prone to talk about it, but it doesn't sound like it. Yeah.
You know, I think there's still a lot of wanting to avoid it, but and I'm talking about the group of people who are here at Belmont right now. I wonder, though, talking to people like, asking people like Ruth Ichinaga and yeah, Dr. Yatabe, what are your thoughts about this, and about whether Japanese Americans, how Japanese feel about talking about it?
Ruth, do you want to respond to that?
Ruth?
You have to unmute. You're still muted.
Or Grace, what do you think?
Or Kay, did you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I think that people are more willing to talk than they were, say, 20, 30 years ago. And those who are a little bit more politically inclined also are speaking out more in relation to what's going on with immigrants now. And I think some of us feel like it's important to talk about it, but I think it varies by what generation or what age group we are.
Yes, I think that's very much a good point. I think that your generation really has enough distance from it. You can explore it. It's not as threatening as if you had actually been through it and
Right.
actually felt the hostility and the pain of being rejected.
Mhm.
There's another question in the chat box for just anyone to answer. Do you think there are ways that Japanese and Japanese Americans are dealing with sheltering in place that are different from other people in the United States? Anyone have any thoughts on that? Emiko?
Oh, no, I'm just
Thinking.
thinking, yeah.
Huh. Hmm. Stephen, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I remember my mother has always called me gaman zioi, and
What does that mean?
uh, I feel like I learned, from her, from my grandparents, that gaman there was a value in that, and I feel like that's something that was always kind of, I think, ridiculed in my family about that the Hakujin were not like that or something. There was that Americans don't have that value, and I felt from the American side though that the gaman was often not seen as such a valuable thing, and it was seen as you're accepting things too much. But I think it does run through Japanese culture that I know, and that it is seen as a value, and it's a value that can have some negative aspects to it in terms of trying to change things, but it also is a value that can be really sustaining, I think, in this moment in which you feel so strongly your helplessness. You feel so clear the things that you cannot do no matter how hard you try. And I think that in that sense, it probably doesn't sound responsible to say it's easier, but in some way, I believe that values like that really help Japanese and Japanese Americans to get through the kinds of times in life in which you really are helpless to change some things and to accept that this is the way they are. I was lucky to grow up in a multicultural family in which I could see the way the Irish dealt with things, the way the Japanese did, and that was always something that the Japanese side felt was different. Like, why are you complaining, or why are you always talking about that? That's just the way it is, right? And you have to accept it the way it is. And I could see both sides of the values, and the values, what was more valuable at different times in life. But I do think that this kind of moment in our history, which for me is extremely unusual. I think for everybody, this is a moment that we have not confronted. Some people have, in our community, and I think that's where there's a strength there, though, in having that experience and getting through a difficult time by that sense of gaman, which I think everybody understands and appreciates.
I look at some of the other countries that have had some success in dealing with the coronavirus, like Taiwan, Hong Kong, China, South Korea, maybe Japan. And they all seem to have this kind of social adeptness about kind of seeing something wider than just the individual. And we in America are sort of have this cowboy culture and we sort of kind of run this kind of rugged individualism through our consciousness all the time. And that seems to be sort of counter to what is required right now, where you sort of have to be mindful of your own situation and mindful of others to really be successful in kind of keeping the virus sort of at least at bay.
We have a.
So I don't think it's necessarily Japanese American, but I think it's sort of like a more widespread cultural Asian construct. Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, this is Ron Wakabayashi. I'm down here in LA, and I've spent my whole life in one way or another in terms of working in the Japanese American community. And now that I'm a senior and scared to death of this virus, I don't dare even leave the house. And I've been real active on different social media, just monitoring it. And the thing that just stands apart for me is the way the community is responding and looking after each other. Like in Little Tokyo here, like the folks have put together, a GoFundMe to fund the restaurants that are struggling, to buy lunches for the Issei who are still living alone, and talking. The same thing is true out of the Gardena Valley Japanese Cultural Center. For me personally, people have checked in on me, and they've gone and gone to the Japanese markets and made sure that I'm okay. People that literally that I did not know before. And I still don't really know them, but I've watched them on Facebook, and then kind of have joined with them. So I do think there's a sense of group, a sense of community that still carries over, and I think it's becoming stronger. It's not something that we always experience. Even when I was the JSAL director, certainly I had a huge amount of exposure to the community, but even more than then, but probably with it, the sense that I have of an appreciation for being part of a community, particularly this community that has been so considerate, open, and proactively looking after each other, is just quite remarkable. My work has been in, for the last 20 years, in community conflict across the country. And I don't know of any other community that works this way. And I don't mean to talk about Japanese exceptionalism, but there's something there that I deeply appreciate and I'm thankful for. Okay, I'll shut up, but I wanted to just share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron, for joining us from LA. There's a comment in the chat box from Brianne Imada, and she's a MSW student, and she said, thanks to all the presenters for this lovely event. In this last week of finishing my MSW, I really appreciate Stephen's reflections, especially in thinking about the importance of shikata ganai and the role of acceptance in being able to affect personal and societal change. To Eric's point earlier, I am finding more and more that having a spiritual grounding is so important in thinking about the process, the how of working towards social justice and not just the end point. And then Jane Yamashiro chimed in earlier. I think that question about if Japanese Americans are dealing differently. She says, thanks, Stephen, I agree. And it's helpful for you to point those things out.